The old man looked up from his newspaper, the corners of his eyes crinkling as he squinted at the setting sun. The local diner was quiet today, not that it ever got very busy. "Been waiting for you, son," he said, not taking his eyes off the paper. "What's the headline?" I asked, sliding into the booth across from him. The old man didn't budge, his paper a barricade between us. "Another disappearance. The fifth this year. Can you believe it?" His voice was gravelly, a hint of a long-lost cigarette habit. The bell above the door jingled as the waitress, Rachel, sailed over with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She set one down in front of me, the other in front of the old man, who hadn't even looked up yet. She glanced at me with a knowing smile. "You two gonna save the town from whatever's spooking folks again?" I couldn't help but chuckle. "It's just a quiet evening, Rachel." But the old man was serious. He folded the newspaper and placed it on the table, revealing the headline, "Mysterious Disappearances Plague Quiet Town." His eyes met mine, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This ain't like the others, boy. They're all happening at the old factory. You know, the one that's been abandoned since the accident." The words "the accident" hung in the air like a fog, thick with the weight of unspoken terrors. I nodded solemnly, recalling the whispers of the townsfolk. "The one where the kids dare each other to spend the night?" The old man's eyes grew darker. "That's the one. They say it's haunted by the souls of the workers who never made it out. But this is different. It's not just kids anymore." He took a sip of his coffee, the clinking of the spoon against the porcelain, the only sound in the diner. "It's gotten personal. Too personal." The air grew colder as Rachel returned with our food. She set the plates down with a clank, and the old man's eyes never left the newspaper. "My nephew," he began, "was the first to go missing. A good kid, never caused any trouble. He was just out there taking photos for his school project, and poof, vanished into thin air." I felt a pang of pity. "That's terrible." The old man nodded slowly. "The police have been out there, but they haven't found a single clue, just like the others." He paused, pushing his plate aside. "But I know what you're thinking. You're the town's new hotshot journalist, aren't you?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his gaze. "I've heard some things," I admitted. He leaned closer, the smell of stale tobacco wafting from his worn flannel. "Then you know the legend," he said, his voice barely audible over the hissing of the diner's ancient espresso machine. "They say the factory's haunted by the ghost of the foreman, seeking vengeance for the lives lost in the fire." I nodded, my curiosity piqued. "And you think there's truth to it?" The old man leaned back, his expression a mix of anger and fear. "Truth or not, something's out there and it's taking our people. You need to help me, son. You're the only one who might be able to get to the bottom of this before it's too late." The idea of investigating the haunted factory was both thrilling and terrifying. I'd heard the rumors, the whispers of the townsfolk, but had always dismissed them as campfire tales to scare the young ones. But the desperation in the old man's eyes was too real to ignore. "What makes you think I can do something the police can't?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, sliding it across the table. "This," he said, tapping a finger on a series of dates and names scribbled in a shaky hand. "These are the nights the others disappeared. All of them. And all of them had one thing in common: the full moon." My heart quickened as I studied the paper. The next full moon was only a week away. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "I'll look into it." The old man's grip tightened on my hand. "Thank you," he murmured, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "For my nephew. For all of them." As the night grew darker, I found myself driving down the deserted road leading to the factory. The headlights of my car played over the cracked asphalt, casting eerie shadows on the overgrown trees that lined the path. The looming silhouette of the factory grew larger in the distance, its rusted smokestacks piercing the night sky like skeletal fingers. I parked in the weed-infested lot, the gravel crunching under my boots as I approached the chain-link fence. The gate was padlocked, but the chain had been cut, hanging open like a gaping mouth. I took a deep breath and stepped through, the cold metal scraping against the fabric of my jacket. The air inside the factory was thick with the scent of dust and decay. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a maze of abandoned machinery. The floorboards groaned under my weight, echoing through the vast space. I could feel the eyes of the ghosts of the past watching me, their whispers a faint background to the silence. As I ventured deeper, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to be coming from the heart of the factory, the place where the fire had started. My skin prickled with goosebumps as the temperature dropped and the air grew colder. The light from my flashlight began to flicker, casting eerie shadows on the walls that danced like ghosts in a macabre ballet. In the center of the room, I found what remained of the foreman's office, the door hanging off its hinges. Inside, a dusty desk and chair stood sentinel, untouched by time. The whispers grew into a cacophony of screams and pleas for help. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as a chilling breeze swept through the room, knocking over the chair with a resounding crash. The flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I could feel a presence, something malevolent, drawing closer. The screams grew louder, surrounding me. I fumbled for my phone, my trembling hands finally managing to dial the emergency number. As I whispered for help, the whispers grew into a roar, and the room grew colder still. Suddenly, a chilling hand clamped over my mouth, and my phone was ripped from my grasp. I tried to scream, but the only sound that escaped was a muffled whimper. The grip tightened, and I felt myself being dragged away from the office, the cold floor beneath me now slick with an unseen substance. My eyes strained to see through the inky blackness, catching fleeting glimpses of ghostly figures flitting around the machinery. The hand released me, and I tumbled to the ground. The whispers grew to a crescendo, and the floor beneath me began to shake. The lights flickered back on, and there, standing before me, was the spectral figure of the foreman. His eyes were hollow pits of rage, his burnt and twisted body a testament to the fire that had consumed him. I stumbled to my feet, my heart racing as the floor vibrated violently. The ghosts of the workers circled around me, their cries for vengeance now clear and terrifying. The foreman pointed a charred finger at me, his jaw moving in silent accusation. The ground beneath me cracked open, and the ghost pushed me towards the abyss. I clawed at the floor, trying to find purchase, but it was as if I was sliding on ice. The chasm grew wider, and I could feel the heat from the fiery depths below. I knew I had to act fast, or I'd be swallowed by the very place that had claimed so many others. Summoning all my strength, I shouted into the void, "Your anger is justified, but I'm not the one who wronged you. I'm here to help." The words echoed through the factory, and for a moment, the screams ceased. The foreman's eyes searched mine, and his hand, no longer cold and unforgiving, hovered over my shoulder, offering a ghostly lifeline. With a tremendous effort, I pulled myself to my feet. The foreman's gaze softened, and he nodded once before disappearing into the shadows. The other ghosts followed, their cries fading as they dispersed into the bowels of the factory. The ground stopped shaking, and the room grew still. Breathing heavily, I turned to leave, my mind racing with questions and fear. As I stepped out of the factory, the cold moonlight bathed the parking lot, illuminating the crumpled piece of paper in my pocket. I had to find out what really happened that night. I had to expose the truth before the next full moon, or the town would never be free from the factory's grim grip. The following days were a blur of interviews and research. I talked to former workers, families of the deceased, and pored over dusty archives in the local library. The story grew darker with each new piece of information. It seemed the factory had a long history of neglect and cover-ups, leading to the tragic fire that claimed so many lives. The foreman was vilified, blamed for the accident, but was he truly responsible? The night before the next full moon, I returned to the diner seeking Rachel's guidance. She listened intently, her eyes wide with fear and fascination. "You've got to find the truth," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. "But be careful. Whatever's in there doesn't just want vengeance. It wants justice." Armed with my findings and a newfound determination, I approached the factory with a plan. I knew the police had overlooked something crucial, something that might explain the haunting and the disappearances. I had to find it before it was too late for the next victim. As the moon rose, full and heavy in the sky, I slipped back through the gaping mouth of the factory gate. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. This time, I was ready. I had brought salt, holy water, and a list of names. The foreman's spirit had given me a clue. a way to help him and his workers find peace. The floorboards groaned under my boots, but I didn't flinch. I walked through the maze of machinery, reciting the names of the lost souls as I sprinkled salt and holy water. The whispers grew quieter, the anger in the air dissipating like mist in the early morning sun. In the heart of the factory, where the fire had started, I found what I was looking for. A hidden compartment behind the foreman's desk, filled with documents detailing the negligence and corruption that led to the tragedy. The factory owners had bribed officials, ignored warnings, and ultimately had caused the accident that claimed so many lives. The foreman's spirit appeared beside me, his eyes no longer filled with rage but a quiet sorrow. He nodded, the weight of his unspoken thanks palpable. The ground beneath me solidified, the heat of the spectral fire gone. With the evidence in hand, I fled the factory, the ghosts of the workers following me out. The old man was right. It was personal, and now I had the means to set things right. The next day, the story broke. The factory owners were exposed, and the town's fear began to wane. The old man's nephew was found, traumatized but alive, in a hidden cellar beneath the factory. The town breathed a sigh of relief, and the whispers grew faint. The full moon that night was peaceful, the ghosts of the workers now at rest. The factory stood silent, no longer haunted by the echoes of the past. But as I drove away, glancing back in the rearview mirror, I could have sworn I saw the foreman's ghost standing in the moonlight, watching over his former domain. His gaze was no longer filled with anger but a solemn peace. He knew his story had been told, and justice would come.